Not it, note for note. Close enough though. That's Atomic Punk. I gotta readjust the camera here. Sorry about the palm close up here. My name's Elton. This is Elton 15. Welcome. Just shut off my amp here. Got the hiss of the amp going. Okay, well, Atomic Punk from Van Halen's first album. That's my attempt at it. Again, I grew up at a time where you'd sit on the edge of your bed with your radio and your tape cassette, and you play it and you rewind it and you play it and you rewind it and you listen for the notes, and hopefully you get close. And as I said in the previous video, it wasn't until YouTube that you see that, wow, there's so many great players out there and they're nailing this stuff note for note. And what I thought was like a really great interpretation became, whoa, I gotta kind of really listen a little bit more closely. But anyways, that's kind of how I learned it to my ear. So there it is. Not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but more my nod to Ed and his awesome guitar playing, right? All right, so that's Atomic Punk off the first album. Well, I'm doing a recap of what is chapter 9 here of Alex Van Halen's book called Brothers, about Eddie Van Halen. And so as we jump into chapter 9, they had begun their tour in 1978. Whoa, big going on back there. Back in 1978 with Journey and Montrose, and they're now kind of shifting gears and they're going over the UK, and they're opening for their idols, Black Sabbath. Black Sabbath loomed large in the Van Halen's really early days of clubs, and even before David Lee Roth was in the band, back when Eddie Van Halen once sang for Van Halen. They weren't called Van Halen at the time, of course. I do believe they were Genesis and then kind of changed over to Mammoth. But so there they are. These guys that they worshiped, that they loved, and sharing the stage with them. They couldn't believe it. Al says, we're on the back in our bedrooms listening to like Iron Maiden, trying to write down all the words so when Ed would sing it, we'd be able to play it in the backyard parties. And here we are now in UK opening for them, which was tremendous. It was definitely their cup of tea, as they called it, in terms of like, wow, this is the band that we really, really like. The other bands that they played early in the tour, good bands, great music, but to Van Halen, this is right up their alley. Really, really good stuff. So one thing they noticed right off the bat was, where are the girls? They'd finish playing and as an opener, and they'd go and watch Black Sabbath, and I guess when you're on stage, you get the lights in your eyes, you can see the crowd, but limitedly, in a limited fashion. But not very many women at the Black Sabbath shows, and I think David Lee Roth was quoted for like, I love rock and roll, but where are the girls here? Al went on to say that they were really winning over Led Zeppelin fans, that Eddie Van Halen's guitar solo, Eruption, was really just the clincher that really won over a lot of Black Sabbath fans. And Van Halen was fresh out of the gates. I mean, they were hungry. You've got Black Sabbath, which had been together now for 10 years or so, and they were kind of tired at that point. This run Van Halen did with Black Sabbath in the UK, they do 25 shows in like 30 days, barely a day off. And Ozzy went on to say for that tour that Van Halen opened up for him, they were kind of kicking our butts every night. They were young and hungry. What Alex said was that the band treated them awesome. After shows, they'd go to a bar or whatever, and there was such camaraderie between them that they couldn't believe that they were just average guys that were just super cool to hang around with. Al also went on to say that Tony Iommi, the guitar player for Black Sabbath, and Eddie Van Halen got along like really well and became lifelong friends. They're both guitar tinkerers. They're tweaking their instruments to a degree. You've got the idea that as far as other things in common between Tony and Eddie, is that they were musicians that couldn't read music. Of course, Eddie had that background of piano and stuff, but it was all by ear. He was fooling his teachers, which is pretty amazing. Wow, for years. Al goes on to say that Ozzy invites them back to his house, this kind of quaint English country house, and they're carrying on having conversations, just chilling out, and Ozzy disappears and then comes back with a shotgun and starts taking aim at some decoy ducks in a little pond that they had, and started shooting them just out of nowhere, and then disappears with the gun, comes back and sits down and joins them, as if that wasn't kind of out of the ordinary and just general conversation. Ozzy's gone, comes back and starts blowing away these decoys, and then puts the gun back and comes back out and hangs out. Al got a kick out of that for sure. The Van Halen album, having been released now, goes gold, while the Van Halens were in Aberdeen, Scotland, and as a big celebration for it, they decided to trash the hotel. They were, just going nuts with it. Fire extinguisher fights, and not realizing that they were going to foot the bill for all the damage they did. I don't understand these bands when they sign contracts in the days of the 70s and before that, not thinking that all this stuff wasn't being covered by the record company per se, maybe up front, but ultimately it was coming out of their earnings, and maybe a hard lesson to learn thereafter. But they went right to destroying things after learning about this great success. And so the cops were called, and I guess they were trying to flush a lot of drugs down toilets on the tour bus, which made no sense because they could have just found the drugs in the tour bus. Alex was pointing more towards the roadies and doing that stuff, but I'm sure they had their fair share of paraphernalia of sorts. But they were cautioned, do not return to Scotland. And as Al says, he doesn't think they ever went back to Scotland thereafter. They continued their tour with Sabbath coming to the United States. They were able to fill arenas, which they were just ecstatic about. They were on a rather large show. It's called the Summerfest, 56,000 people, Anaheim Stadium, Black Sabbath, Boston, Van Halen. I think Aerosmith may have been on the bill, possibly, and a few other bands. And so Van Halen wanted to make this huge entrance, and so they hired some skydivers to look as though Van Halen was skydiving right before they were to go on stage. And they came on stage. They actually piled into like a waiting van, the skydivers did, and Van Halen was already in skydiving outfits. They didn't do the skydiving. They hired some people to do the skydiving for them. And then they ran on stage with their skydiving outfits, and they're pulling it off, and people are going nuts because they thought they skydived in. Talk about a big entrance. Pretty cool. So funny. And so I guess they fooled some of the people, or most of the people, but maybe not so much today if they would do that in 2024. But hey, kudos to them for doing that and making such a large entrance. Pretty awesome. Al and Ed's mom and dad ended up going to a show in Houston, Texas. And Al's mom was taken aback by the girls backstage, the groupies, saying "V Vils," which is kind of describing the disposition of these ladies, and being shocked that Alex was, in the company of them. But anyways, he goes on to say that mom would never make it on a tour. So I think that was interesting, kind of putting that aside. And then on that same tour, Ozzy disappears in Nashville. They would stay customarily at Sheraton's and Hilton's. And so I guess at one point, Ozzy had overslept, and he went back to the hotel after one of the shows and went into the wrong room. Cleaning ladies were cleaning a room. He pulls out the wrong key or something. I don't remember what the details are necessarily, but he ends up going to sleep in a wrong room. Was able to get in that wrong room because the cleaning ladies were cleaning the room, and I guess he kicked them out and went to sleep. And they moved on to the next show or what have you, and they couldn't find Ozzy because they looked in the room that he was supposed to be in and he wasn't there. So they scoured everywhere for like 24 hours, searching stairwells and you name it, and they couldn't find him. So they had to make up that show, and Alex wasn't all thrilled with the fact that they had to make up the show because Van Halen was put on at noon. Noon's not very rock and roll, and it's kind of tough to pull off that whole production and feel it in a way that you need to when you're playing at noon. The boys end up going to, the whole band goes back to Amsterdam, which is for the boys is a homecoming, triumphant return, that kind of thing. And so they play a place called the Paradise Theater, and Al says it was lame. It was anything but paradise. There was a lot of stress going into that show because they had family members from both their mom and dad's side coming over and trying to meet family obligations, and he did not enjoy that necessarily. The other guys in the band were interested in seeing the red light district. Ed and Al were not impressed. They kind of knew of it, but I guess the road crew and whoever went with them on a tour to Amsterdam and the red light district thought it was like the Magic Kingdom. But Al and Ed, at least in the book, the impression is it wasn't anything special to them. Anyways, Al says that he loved to travel, and he thinks Ed, after a while, just was more in tune with staying home in the confines of his small room, being creative, and that being his I guess his comfort zone. But Al loved to travel, and I guess felt it important to point out that it wasn't Ed's cup of tea necessarily. He felt that Europe was pretty much the same no matter where you went, stage to stage. There wasn't much difference, except the countries had different flavors, but as far as the shows, they kind of went the same. He felt Van Halen was he didn't say the word bulletproof, but it seems as though there would be an appropriate way to describe it, was bulletproof, because the backyard parties and the club days just really well prepared them. They felt like they could play anywhere and connect with any audience due to that. The whole idea of being able to just kind of set up shop and play and do your job, and that seems to be a theme in that part of chapter 9. But then they went to Japan, and Japan was completely different. So with Japan, you've got an interesting thing here. It was like another planet, as Al describes it. The language is different. It wasn't polluted by Western capitalism. You had like one McDonald's. But prior to Van Halen arriving, they had just allowed rock bands to start playing again. So a band called Rainbow, if you're familiar with Deep Purple, the guitar player, Ritchie Blackmore, when he had left that band, started another band called Rainbow. And it was at one of their shows that there was a death or a couple of deaths through trampling. And so rock shows was shut down. And I'm not sure how long they were shut down for, but they were shut down long enough that when Van Halen returned, it was kind of like, all right, they're opening this back up. But as far as the rock show was concerned, they were not. The audience was not allowed to stand up. They had to remain seated. And so he said it felt kind of weird that they were playing to a crowd that was seated, pretty reserved. He felt like it was his old piano recitals where you could hear a pin drop. Anyways, Al goes on to say that he was impressed that when the show was over, they went back to the hotels and finding, Japanese groupies. And I guess he took full advantage of that, because the next morning, a father of one of the girls is knocking on his door with a sword. And he went on to say, quite literally, a sword, saying that his family was dishonored and that he needed to marry his daughter to make things right. And Al said he couldn't wait to get that guy out of there because of that. Wasn't aware of customs or traditions. He just was kind of acting like a young rock and roll person in the 70s. And so there was that story, which I thought was pretty funny. As far as being able to play anywhere, let me read again from the book, a quick passage. This is on page 129, and it goes on to say something to that effect. It is this: the greatest thing was finding out that wherever you went in the world, all you had to do was set up your gear and start playing, and you could get people partying. That was an amazing feeling. You know that you're bringing it. It doesn't matter where you go. It doesn't matter that you can't speak the language, because music is universal, and so is youth. And that sort of summed up their experience going through Europe, coming back to the United States, going to Japan, and hey, we can do this anywhere, and having that feeling of just like, yeah, we got this, which is pretty darn cool. Marshall Burrell, their manager at the time, this is where they realized this guy isn't cutting it. He's not going to be bringing Van Halen to the next level. They had a meeting, and kind of what ended up cementing it was Marshall Burrow was videoing Van Halen with his Super 8 camera in uncompromising positions, whether it's drug use or other rock and roll lifestyle cliches. And he went and showed the executives and anyone at Warner Brothers, right down to secretaries, these exploits that Van Halen was taking advantage of during the tour, and that didn't sit well with them at all. And so they said goodbye to him. But no ill feelings. Al goes on to say that he saw Marshall within recent years and had a good time with him. Good guy, I guess, to a degree, but no hard feelings. And so who becomes Van Halen's manager? Noel Monk, who was their tour manager. And with Noel, there wasn't much experience there. I mean, he had some previous experience as a tour manager with the Sex Pistols and then with Van Halen. So they make him their manager. Al goes on to say at this time, Dave is looking to secure a little bit more control, kind of following his own father's advice, Dave's father's advice, that you got to know all the details because you got to treat this like a business. But Al's saying, yes, you can't micromanage this. You can't promote the band, do the merchandise for the band, and all variety things with the band, and also be the band. And anyway, so Noel becomes the manager. And there are two conditions: that he has to wear a suit and tie all the time. That's one of the conditions. And the other condition was that he had to wear an eye patch. But they were funny about that. And Noel, hearing these conditions, asked which eye, which I thought was pretty funny. He never wore an eye patch as a manager. It was just sort of a funny aside. Anyways, Al goes into Noel's kind of background, that Noel liked having guns, that they end up going to his house, seeing what his house like, bringing Ed and Al's dad with them, and seeing that he had airlocks that separated different parts of the house, and that he had this like massive like safe in his house, and they're all drinking, and Noel's trying to show him the inside of the safe, but can't get the combination open, and it's taking a really long time, and they're drinking like, no, you can open this thing here. And he's like, oh, I can't. The combination's on a piece of paper inside the safe. And I guess Al and Ed's dad is like, oh boy, what have you guys gotten yourself into? This is your manager, and uses the Dutch term "tsong zhong zhong," and I'm sure I'm butchering that, but that's a translation that Al puts in the book in Dutch, and then goes on to say, oh boy, that's what it means, and what the heck have you guys gotten yourself into? And anyways, that became their manager, and Noel thought that he could bring their merchandise to a next level, because his parents, I guess, our family was in the garment business, and for Al, that wasn't a one-for-one kind of one leads to the other. But if you read Noel's book, which I have, it's called Running with the Devil, that was released a couple years ago, he goes on to say that helped make Van Halen quite rich. I mean, the merchandise industry was something that wasn't as big as it is today, selling t-shirts and stuff, but all other aspects. I mean, I think Kiss is the band that kind of pushed it to the limit with that, from Kiss coffins to Kiss, you name it, pajamas to masks, to all types of stuff. But with Van Halen, he thought he could help bring them to the next level with merchandising, particularly t-shirts, and of which they did. So it's weird to hear Al talk about Noel negatively in that aspect, but reading Noel's book, who do you believe here? We're talking about Al's book right now, so we're going with Al's opinion, and saying that he wasn't that impressed, that he really didn't know much about it and was way over his head with it. But anyways, went on to say, Noel died a couple years ago, and rest in peace. I'll see you on the other side, but you were a lousy manager, but a great and fun guy to hang out with, which I thought was pretty funny. And then Van Halen goes on to open for the Rolling Stones. So, they, as the year went on, they started off with Journey and Montrose, and then Black Sabbath, huge, and then the Rolling Stones, which was the biggest band on the planet at the time. And Alex's roadie at the time, which was a good friend, Greg, was a huge fan of Mick Jagger. So the drums were being set up, and Al has these thing called octobans, which are an interesting part of a drum set, adding to more percussion parts. And I guess Mick Jagger had never seen that before. And so he's checking out Al's kit during or after a sound check, and Al didn't know who that was, checking out his kit, and was ready to say something. And then Mick Jagger stands up and he realizes, oh, it's Mick Jagger. So he calls Greg over, his good friend and roadie, who he calls his associate, which is pretty funny. Calls him on over, gets to meet Mick Jagger. But the night before, he and Al were involved in some hijinks where you run really fast and right before you hit the wall, you stop. He likened it to kind of like what the guys do in Jackass, if you're familiar with Johnny Knoxville and Bam Margera and stuff like that. Kind of low level that, he said. But Greg didn't stop and ended up hitting it. And so he meets Mick Jagger with these, Greg got glasses on to like kind of cover his puffy face and saying that he met him, but didn't really meet him. He went to go shake his hand, but his eyes are so swollen shut that he's kind of missing it, I guess. But kind of ends on a sad note, chapter 9, because he talks about Greg taking his own life in a quick blurb, and that he back in 2004, Al and his wife went to go visit him, and he was giving him all these relics from the past, pictures, backstage passes, a lot of things from Van Halen past, and wasn't thinking about, what's this guy doing? And then shortly thereafter, a month or two later, had taken his own life. And then Al kind of putting the pieces together. Wow, this guy was cleaning house before he passed away. But the chapter ends on a good note in its last paragraph, saying that Van Halen went platinum, sold 10 million in 1996. After 3 years on being on the charts, they went it's kind of right through the roof. But anyways, that's chapter 9. I'm running out of space here as far as my camera's concerned. I'm Elton. This is Elton's 15. Thank you very much for tuning in again. Thanks.